So good morning, everyone. Welcome to Adoption UK's webinar from Shadim Hussain, who is CEO of My Foster Family. And we're looking at the barriers that the Muslim community faces in adoption and other issues surrounding that. It's all recorded, so you can watch this from the members area from tomorrow. Any questions you've got, just pop in the Q&A or the chat facility, and we'll broach those later on in the webinar with Shadim and his colleague Shaqib. Okay, so guys, thanks very much. I'll hand over to you. I'll still be here, although I'll switch my camera off, and we'll come back for any questions at the end.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, everyone. My name is Shadim Hussain. I'm CEO of My Foster Family, and I have my colleague here with me. Shaqib, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Shaqib, and I'm head of operations, working with Shadim here in My Foster Family, and also our sister organisation, My Adoption Family, as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So for everyone who is not aware of the organisation, I thought it'd be useful just to give you a bit of a background context before we go into the main presentation. So firstly, I'd just like to let you know where I am today. So my father's not been too well and was admitted to the hospital. He is going to be discharged today, so all is well. And I'm at the hospital now to pick him up, but the discharge papers got a bit delayed. So as I am right now sat in the quiet room of the chaplaincy, and you can clearly see this is a very appropriate setting for the webinar today, which is about faith and cultural literacy. And often when we do these webinars, we are with our colleagues from Home for Good. And I know many of you will know Krish and James, who have, I'm sure, presented to you, and they kindly introduced us. So the purpose of the webinar today was to explain to you a little bit about the experience of Muslim people going into adoption. But I thought what would be useful is to give you the background context to the organisation, where we started, why we started, what our journey has been like, and you know, how we feel we can work together to improve the experience of all potential adopters. Obviously, within the context of the webinar today, it's about the experience of Muslim adopters. So going back to around 2017, in fact 2016, at the height of the refugee crisis, we all recall the massive influx of asylum seekers and refugees coming from different parts of the Middle East and Africa, trying to get into the UK. And we remember that, you know, literally hundreds of thousands of people walking through Europe. And then we start to see the barriers going up in certain countries. And we saw how welcoming Germany was, and Germany let in a lot of people, and they managed to settle there. And we know around the same time, there was a lot of challenges in the UK with Brexit, and you know, the sort of political environment was not so welcoming anymore in the UK. But we probably remember the Dubs Amendment, where Lord Dubs had done a lot of work in trying to encourage the government to welcome more asylum seekers and refugees, and recognizing at that time that there was a shortage of potential homes in the UK. I mean, you know, this was going back in terms of looking at it from a fostering perspective. You know, our organisation that's based here in Bradford, it's called the Faith Centre. We were approached by Bradford Council, I think it was around October 2016, and it was at the time of when the Calais camp was shut down, obviously over in France, and there was a massive disbursement of these UAS, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And you know, through the efforts of Lord Dubs and others, there was a sort of semi-commitment by the UK government that they would let in so many thousands of these unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And knowing and recognizing that many of these children were coming from Muslim countries and many were Muslim, the Muslim Fostering Project was born. And our starting point was we did an event in Bradford for Bradford Council, and we invited people from the community who are interested in fostering unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. And we found it tremendous. You know, we had an amazing response from the local community. There was when people started to go through and messaging, you know, and some of those barriers were put up by people from the Muslim community, and as a result, the Muslim Fostering Project was established in March 2017. So we had some funding from Islamic Relief UK and a number of other organisations, and we worked in partnership with the Fostering Network, and essentially we established what was the foundations of my foster family and my adoption family. And over that, what has it been now, a 3 coming on to a 4-year period, we've had an amazing journey of learning and understanding the challenges and the barriers, both at a community authority or agencies within the voluntary sector, of course in the private sector as well. We've had lots of different engagement, and what we've seen is that there is a different approach and a different style to how people of minority communities, people of faith communities are engaged by different parts of the system. Some appear to be more welcoming, some can be more challenging. And what we decided to do was we commissioned a piece of research that was done by the Fostering Network. And that research was to look at the barriers to recruiting Muslim foster carers. So we had Rotherham Council, Surrey Council, Central Beds, and Bristol. So these were the 4 local authorities that were research partners, and we had 1 independent fostering agency. And the reason why I'm giving you the background to the organisation is that a lot of the learning that we had through our journey in fostering can certainly be applied to adoption in terms of those relationships between the organisation, be it Adoption UK or Bradford Council or Foster Care Associates, whichever entity it is, and the potential adopters. There's many different layers to that relationship of how you come into contact with prospective people from these communities, and the experience that both people on your side who work in the marketing team, social workers, people who sit on panels, yeah. So all of the different people that are on your side, and let's say the people that are in the community, there is an element of engagement. So first and foremost, you will do marketing. So in order to raise awareness about adoption, you will do marketing. It may be through social media, through digital, through your website, through presenting case studies. And one of the early issues that we saw in terms of awareness and marketing was a lack of use of people from minority communities. So quite often, what you would see in the marketing materials that we used is that more often than not, it would be a white British family. And therefore, by not having a diverse array of marketing materials, automatically there is a barrier created, because somebody who is considering to become an adopter, you know, marketing and awareness is an exercise that attracts people who are interested. And when somebody doesn't feel a connection, where they are not seeing Black or Asian or other minority people, then either they might feel that they're not welcome, or they might feel that there isn't a need for a adopter in that particular area coming from their background. However, what we have seen from the media and what we do see from reports from government, other areas, is that the biggest sharers and adopters happens to be within BAME minority communities. So more effort needs to be made in terms of how we engage these communities. And that is our first principle of how we engage, is that when we are using marketing materials, when we are presenting case studies, we try our utmost to use people who represent and reflect the community and the type of adopters that we are looking for. The second challenge that we know is around recruiting adopters for sibling groups, you know, and again, we know from consensus and data in the UK that more often than not, families that are from a minority community tend to have a larger than average family. So there's a greater chance that when children go into care and when we are looking for adoption placements for sibling groups, quite often they may well be, or there's a greater chance that they will be coming from a minority community. The third challenge that we know is around recruiting adopters for children with special needs. And again, I don't think there is any particular data or understanding on whether or not there is more children coming from minority communities or Muslim backgrounds that have these challenges. Nevertheless, it's something else that we considered, that when we are looking for adopters, we want people who maybe have a specialism, maybe have some lived experience. And to be fair, I don't see enough in my own knowledge and experience in terms of awareness raising about the particular type of adopters that we need. So we're talking about ethnic backgrounds, we're talking about faith groups, we're talking about specialisms, we're talking about those who have the capacity to take on a larger pool of children. And what we do know from the data is that Black children wait on average the longest to find a adoption placement. And what we have also seen is from our experience of working with adoption agencies and referring potential adopters, is we've had a number of challenges based upon the experience of potential adopters. So if we go back to October 2019, so I think it was September 2019, the government had very kindly, or the Department of Education had very kindly given, I think it was around £25,000 to each
Looks like Shadim's having some issues with his Wi-Fi.
Yeah, okay, I thought that was me for a moment. So
No.
it is Shadim. Yeah, he's in the hospital, so.
I know, he's probably relying on that Wi-Fi. Let's just give him a minute, see if he comes back.
It looks like he's still talking when I looked at his.
Oh, it's the perils of technology. Oh my God.
He's dropped off. Oh dear. Right. Right. Do you want me to carry on then, Joe?
If that's okay with you, and then hopefully he'll be able to jump back on.
Okay. So hopefully he'll join us again in a moment. So, but what I'll do is that I'll take over at this point and sort of go through my part. So I'll just introduce myself again. I'm Shaqib Junaija. I work with my foster family, my adoption family, as a project manager, head of operations, and also the safeguarding lead. I also work with Bradford Council as an education safeguarding officer. And in this role, in this particular role, I think I've come on board my foster family as a local imam and as somebody who could sort of support the faith literacy element of some of the issues that have been found in terms of the process of Muslim adopters, sometimes also Christian adopters, or adopters from different faith backgrounds, in what they face when they try and go through the process of adopting a child. So I wanted to just think about faith literacy for a moment. What is faith literacy? Why are we talking about faith literacy? And why particularly the word faith? I think it's very important to understand that, if we go back to the Equalities Act and we think about the 9 different protected characteristics, we find amongst them faith is one of them. And for many people, faith is an important part of their definition of who they are. They would, possibly introduce themselves sometimes as, I'm a Muslim, or, coming from a Christian background, or, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist, whatever it might be. It is an element of who a person is. So faith literacy here, and especially looking at it from the Muslim perspective, it's an important aspect because that's a definition of who the person is. It's an element of their being, and it would define their values, and it would also be important for them when it comes to adopting. So we need to look at this element, and that's why faith literacy is important for us. For those of you who've been through the process or taken Muslim adopters through the process, you'd know that you probably at some point come up with a question that's to do with religion. That's to do with, okay, so what does your faith say in this regard? It's not just something which we face here in Bradford. It's something that we face up and down the country. We know that from the number of seminars that we've done, and the number of questions that we've had around faith literacy, but also across the world. It's about, when we think about the process of adoption, it's about making that a process better, not just for these adopters, but also for potentially the child. So I think we've got to understand that there can sometimes be a conflict here in understanding. We find that a lot of adoption agencies record information about the ethnicity, but not necessarily information about the faith. And if what we're saying here is that faith's an important element, an important part of that person, important part of the matching process, then perhaps that's an important thing that we need to start doing. Maybe we need to start recording information about faith and religion. Perhaps that might be a way forward. And not having that understanding, and not being able to draw the distinction between ethnicity and religion, can sometimes bring about this sort of conflict in understanding of where to sort of look for the child. If for example, just to give you a very simple example here, if the family's from a Caribbean family, and it might be that the child might be, okay, so a Caribbean child might be very easy to fit into that sort of family. But actually, when we look at religion, if we're looking at a family who are say a Christian or a Muslim Caribbean family, and you know, they eat halal food at home, and you know, they would be you know, perhaps you know, listening to the Quran, which is in a different language, in Arabic. You know, it might actually be a match. It might actually be something that's easier if you were to look at religion and faith as part of that matching process. You might have the child, which might be, you know, from the Indian subcontinent, but actually, because the religion might be similar, there are elements of matching, and there are elements of you know, where those two tie in with the adopting family and the child. And not knowing that, you know, might sometimes create that, which I'm using the term conflict in understanding, because, you know, it could potentially be that the agency might feel, or, you know, the council or whoever it is that's making that decision might feel, okay, well, we don't really see a you know, that this might match up, and there might be potential to see perhaps how things might not work out, when actually we're missing all the elements to show that they actually might work out. So and then, you know, I think it's also worth pointing out that, you know, this we've talked about this from the matching process, but actually, you know, from the other side, when you've got the potential adoptive parents coming forward to say that we'd like to adopt, you know, there can be this potential feeling of discrimination, you know, and I think, you know, we've got to be, you know, we've got to remember the case, what was it, 2019, the couple, the Indian, I think they were a Sikh couple, and it was Maidenhead in Windsor, and they took them to court. They sued Maidenhead and Windsor Council, because they'd tried to go through the adoption process, and I think it was the Manda family, the Manda couple, and you know, they were, you know, the judge ruled in their favor to say it was a case of discrimination, because essentially the person who was looking at that felt that they would do better if they went perhaps to India or Pakistan and adopted there, you know, and so that was felt to be discrimination. And I think we've got to see how, you know, sometimes you know, that if it's not taken into consideration, if the faith element is not taken into consideration, it can also perhaps be seen as discrimination. There is an element of subconscious bias in all of us. You know, I don't really want to go into the debate of is it not, and I think, you know, what we try and do when we do these webinars, and it's actually really, really useful. So I'm going to try and do it now, and I know perhaps there are more people watching this video at another time, but so it'd be good if you could also try and do this. If you've got a pen and paper just to write some things down, I think it would be very good if you could. So I want you just to think about, you know, Christian. You know, if I say this person is a Christian, what are the first 3 words that come into your mind? Now, if you're on this actual webinar now, if you want to just add that to the chat, if you would just go in the chat and just write down the first 3 words that come to your mind when, you know, when I say Christian. So I'll just give you about a few seconds, or about 30 seconds maybe. The first 3 words that come to your mind. And what we find when we do this, what we find is, you know, there'll be some words to say, yeah, a good person. There'll be a number of different words, and some of them might fall into the category of negative words. You know, some of them might fall into the category of positive words. And, you know, more often than not, when we do this, you know, we're doing it online right at the moment, but if we were in a room and we're doing it as a webinar and we get people to stick up their words, then you can actually sort of see where the words fit in terms of, are they positive words or negative words. And then there's an interesting word that comes up, which is the do-gooder, which actually, you know, when you look at it, you think, okay, that might be a positive word. But when you think about it, you know, a do-gooder in the sense when you use it with somebody that he's a do-gooder. You know, it's almost it's got a negative connotation in the way it's used. So you find usually that there are some, you know, more words are almost negative than there are positive. You know, let's do the same with Muslim. So when I say Muslim, what are the first? This person's a Muslim person, or you know, obviously of the Islamic faith. What are the first three words that come to your mind when I say Muslim, or this person's a Muslim? So what do you think of? Just write them down. Three words that come to your mind when you think of Muslim. Okay, so again, we're getting words. We would get words like devout, strict, religious. And again, you know, the number of times when we've done this, you'll always get a word, somebody who will say, you know, dangerous or terrorist or something like that. We do get these words. People do. It does come to. I mean, and we're not saying that these are your own words that you describe a Muslim with, but these are from the first three words that come to your mind. That's what we're asking. What are the first three words that come to your mind? And you know, and we do find that when we divide these words between the positive words and the negative words, there are a lot more words that are negative. And when we compare this to sort of, as we've done with, you know, Christian earlier on, we find that there are, in many cases, more negative words when it comes to Muslim. And again, if we could do this with the third one, we could do it with atheist. So let's do this with atheist. This is an atheist person. What are the first three words that come to your mind when you hear the word atheist? Well, this person's an atheist. So very quickly, if you can just write that down as well, so that you can see what you've got in front of you. And of course, if there's a number of you in the room, then you know you'd be able to compare to see whether actually are we all getting sort of a similar divide between positive and negative words, or is there somebody? I mean, this is going to change from person to person, but we're looking at it as the sort of, you know, just a general, you know, a sweep of what the group might be feeling. And again, you know, there are differences when we do this with different groups or different webinars that we've done, but there is a general trend that we've seen here, and the general trend is again, you would find the words when you think about an atheist, there will be some negative words. You know, there will be some positive terms that come out, and so again, so when you divide it like that, and I just want you to think about that for a moment, because actually, what does this show us when the first three words that come to our mind when we think about a person of a particular faith? What does it tell us if we find that the majority of those words are actually negative words? You know, there is a term in that we would use if we were to look at a person's race and find that the majority of words that come out to describe this person based on their race, if they were negative words, then we could say, you know, perhaps there's an element of racism here. You know, that this we can understand this discrimination here, that there is an element of racism, that because of this person's race, we're finding a lot more negative words coming out. You know, that's we can see that. You know, if it was based on their gender, you know, we'd be able to say that discrimination is sexism. You know, and if it was based on their, you know, sexuality or sexual preference, again, you know, if there are many negative words coming out against a person who the term that we might use might be homophobic. But what's the term that we use when it comes to religion? It's a similar type of discrimination, but actually there isn't really a term. And this again is part of the problem, that we're not actually being able to address the issue of discrimination based on a lack of faith literacy, because there isn't really a term that we use. You know, just it could be religious discrimination, but again, you know, it's not like sexism or homophobic or racist, you know, it's and that understanding sometimes leads to problems. So, you know, that's the issue with subconscious bias. And I think it's really important to understand that faith is an important part of the person, like we said. And I just wanted to mention a couple of things. If you are dealing with a Muslim, a prospective Muslim adoptive couple, and they've come forward and they've said, yeah, so you can possibly tell, maybe because of their dress, or, you know, that they would introduce themselves and they would say, yes, we're a Muslim couple. You know, there are a couple of things that I think would be very useful for you to know and understand if you're going to go through this process with them. The first thing is that there is an element of the faith which is very closely tied to looking after children who don't have anybody to look after them. You know, there is a hadith or a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says, me and the person who looks after an orphan will be like this, and he raises his two fingers, his forefinger, and you know, these two fingers like this, and to show how they will be together, he said, we will be like this in paradise. So we'll be together because you've done such a great act of looking after an orphan child. And that you know, is extended to the looking after children generally, that there is such a great reward in doing that, and it becomes a very you know, motivating part of the act of wanting to go for adoption. Of course, we can understand so many other reasons why a person might want to adopt, or a couple might want to adopt, but actually understanding that the faith is an important part of that as well is very, very useful. And there's a lot of reward for that, like we said, in the hereafter. Also, for Muslim couples who do want to adopt, they look at the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a role model. And when they look at him, they see that he also adopted. You know, the term in Arabic might be slightly different, but actually the action is very similar to adoption. You know, he had a child that he looked after. His name was Zaid. And again, so we find that that act of by a person who's seen as a role model then becomes a very important act to follow, because, you know, we're following our role model. We're doing what he did, the Prophet, peace be upon him. You know, so that again becomes a very important aspect of the faith. And then, you know, just the general understanding of the reward of good actions within religion is an important thing to sort of take into consideration. And a lot of actions that people do will be based on their faith, based on their belief that God's going to reward me, you know, in this world and the hereafter for something good that I do. You know, perhaps he'll put some blessings in my wealth. Perhaps, you know, he'll put some blessings in my life if I do a good deed like this. So those, you know, those elements of understanding that faith are very, very important. So, you know, we've covered that, I think, and we've also sort of talked about the, you know, the barrier that there is a barrier. You know, if we've got that subconscious bias, if we've got you know, an understanding, a conflict of understanding between ethnicity and faith, you know, there is a barrier there. And of course, if we've not got a very clear idea of what discrimination can look like when it comes to religion, again, there's also a barrier there. And I want you to think about, you know, perhaps what has been the most difficult sort of journey or part of the journey that you've had with a Muslim adoptive couple. You know, has there been a particular scenario that's come up that's been really difficult? And I think it's also worth pointing out here that we're not saying that Muslims are a homogeneous group. They are a heterogeneous group. There are diverse group, but there are core elements to the Muslim faith that are going to be shared amongst all the various different parts of that the group. I think one of them, which we can all understand, is a belief in God. That, you know, there is God. God is there. He will reward me. Slightly different to Christianity. It's not a sort of Father, Son, and Holy Ghost idea. It's a very sort of monotheistic faith where there is one God. He's up in the heavens. He's created, or above the heavens, and he's created, you know, the universe and everything. He has so much power. We don't really. He doesn't need us, but we need him. You know, we need him. We need his mercies, forgiveness, etc. There is also another core element here which is shared amongst all of these groups, and that is that God has communicated with human beings over time, and he's given a revelation to his final prophet. He's given a revelation to Jesus, to Moses, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran, as Muslims would call the final testament, you know. And there is also, you know, an understanding in there of gender roles, because actually God's always chosen a man to be a messenger. And I think that's an important understanding, because it's a part of the core shared understanding amongst Muslims, that there is this difference in gender roles. And also that, you know, each of these prophets would themselves be role models. So they would have called to their people to worship God, but also they would have said, we're the example, follow us. You know, and Muslims quite often quote, you know, in the Bible, Jesus says, you know, I am the way and I'm the door, you know, as an example that, yes, you know, and if you didn't know, Muslims do believe in Jesus. They do believe that Jesus is a messenger rather than a son of God. So there is that belief and there is that understanding there. But also, you know, that we talked about this guidance that God's given to these messengers. So the Quran would then be this guidance from God, that God's own words. You've got my role model, my example to follow, but you've also got God's own words here to follow, to read. And what I would suggest, you know, and I think perhaps I've talked quite a lot here now, but a further reading, I think it's quite important for anybody who's involved in the process of working with Muslims through the adoption process. It's very important to read, actually, just going back to some of those core shared elements amongst Muslims. You know, if you haven't read an English translation of the Quran, I'd say read it. If you haven't read a biography of the Messenger, Muhammad, peace be upon him, you get that what you're going back to here is you're trying to evade all of those sort of differences amongst the different groups. And actually, you want to go back to some of those core shared elements between them all. You know, and all of that really, actually, the reason why we're doing that is that we're trying to avoid going to what would be opinions of scholars or opinions of different individuals, but actually going back to sort of this guidance, which most Muslims, if not all Muslims, would say that this actually goes above opinions. This is God's word. You know, God's given this word. This is the messenger. He's shown us this example. You know, so for Muslims generally, you know, a core element there is that this goes above, you know, the different opinions that people might have. And I think, you know, that would probably bring me to a close here. I just wanted to thank everybody for sharing their words there. Perhaps if we had a bit more time, we might be able to go into that a little bit more detail. And I'm sure if there's questions, I know Shadim, you're back now with us. Do you want to jump in here? I sort of stopped you while you were in your flow. I think you got cut off there, didn't you? Joe, are you there?
I think he's back on. Hi, Shaqib. I think Shadim is back on. Shadim, am I right in thinking? He just put in the chat that he was. Oh no. No.
What's happened?
I don't know. I think maybe his Wi-Fi dropped off. He definitely had slides he wanted to share, I think.
Yeah.
If we don't get him back on, I could send the slides to the people who registered for the webinar. But yeah, it's so interesting what you say, and it's never crossed my mind. It's a bit of a light bulb moment about there not being a word for faithism, I suppose it would be.
Yeah.
How do you address it if there's no word?
It's so interesting. Yeah.
Really interesting. And once you name the thing, you can deal with it, can't you? But the fact that it's sort of floating around in the ether makes it more difficult to address, which therein lies the problem.
Yeah, and you know, it is one of the 9 protected characteristics.
Yeah.
You know, and it is an important part of a person's identity. You know, and at the same time, it just seems to be unclear how to deal with it. You know, it's just as you've said, and perhaps if we can get that a bit more clearer, it might really support the process. So
That's really interesting. Hello, Shadim.
Hello, Joe.
Back in action.
Back.
I was trying my best, but Shaqib was on a serious road there.
It was. Yeah, I thought you just dropped out there, but we've got you back. That's brilliant.
Yeah, we got you back.
Yeah.
I've gone through the faith literacy part of it, Shadim, and I think you had some facts which are quite important to share if you can. I don't know. if it's
Yeah,
worthwhile.
I just wanted to provide some case study examples of actual experiences because you know what we have seen is that it's not all you know, doom and gloom. You know, there is some good experiences that people of minority communities have and of faith groups. And as Shaqib was describing earlier, is sometimes we can pigeonhole and put people in a box based on a label. So be it the ethnicity, the sex, the faith, which postcode they live in, you know. But each person is an individual, and how they choose to practice their faith can be very different. So to give you an example, 7 siblings, and I would consider myself to be a practicing Muslim. So I pray 5 times a day. I do my best to be a do-gooder. But my older brother, Naz, he's a typical lad. He joined the British Army when he was 16. You know, he kind of he's a Muslim, so he would clearly say that he is Muslim, but he doesn't pray 5 times a day. You know, and the reality is that when it comes to Eid, which is a big annual celebration for us, a bit like Christmas, the biggest party is at Naz's house. You know. And all the kids want to go to his house because it's a lot more fun than it probably is at my house. And this is something really important for us to understand, is that quite often when people take this journey, let's say an Orthodox Muslim or somebody who's quite strict, will be quite influenced by some of the points that Shaqib raised earlier in terms of their spirituality and their intentions for why they want to adopt, you know, and because they can be quite emotionally charged, you know, for their reasons for why they want to adopt, often that can be seen to be a little bit detrimental because they might be very particular about what they want, or it could be that there's certain questions which come up. So I'm not sure if you went into any detail, Shaqib, about the typical type of challenges that we come across from adoption agencies, such as the Merum issue of looking after a child of a certain age.
No, I haven't gone into any detail as such, you know. But I think it's an important one that I think if you're going to talk about it, it's an important one, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think just some examples for everyone. One is the example of people who are making that journey and how they are engaged. So there was an example where we had actually referred a prospective adopter to an agency, and they didn't get past the initial phone call. So when they contacted the agency and the individual, the marketing admin person, whoever picked up the phone, when they'd established that the person on the line was of a Pakistani background and was Muslim, the advisor told them that there wasn't any children waiting from this background, and that basically they should give up. You know, that there wouldn't be any benefit in them pursuing this application. Yeah. So the prospective adopter turned around and said, "What makes you a Sunni child? You know, and why is it that you said that?" And it was obviously, as you can imagine, a very uncomfortable discussion for both parties. This actual case came back to me as a complaint because we were the organization that had referred this individual. And when I had the opportunity to speak to the prospective adopter and the sort of senior person, the manager at the adoption agency, and the person who had actually had that call, the prospective adopter was compelled by her faith to want to adopt. Lots of advertisements and marketing campaigns appealing for people from a faith background and people from a faith background to consider adoption. The person who was working at the agency, the one who would answer the phone call, they had experience of seeing a lot of potential adopters from this community going through the process, eventually becoming approved, but waiting sometimes up to 2 or 3 years to find a placement. And often, although it was perceived by the potential adopter that maybe this person was racist or Islamophobic or had something against her because she was Pakistani or Muslim, yeah, it was to kind of almost prevent that person from raising their hopes, because they already knew from their data that they had a very high number waiting to be matched, yeah. So what's really important is that as professionals who work in the sector, that we maintain an open mind and we don't give people sort of any reason to feel that they're not welcome because of their ethnicity or because of their faith, because of their background. And if you do have a particular challenge where you might be overprescribed by one particular
Joe, has he dropped off or is it me?
He has frozen, I think. Shadim, can you hear us? No. No. It's absolutely frozen now.
Oh, I heard something. I'm not sure if he's come back. Yeah, oh, he's come
it's
back.
better that
Okay.
you allow that prospective adopter to make that choice and opt out themselves based upon getting the right information and knowledge, rather than assuming in a position. And I think the case that Shaqib had described earlier in terms of the Indian couple from the Southwest.
No, we've gone again.
Okay, Shadim, can you hear me? Can you hear us? Oh, he was making such a great point there. I don't know what he was going to say, but I'm sure it was going to be a great point.
Okay, yeah, it looks like again. Well, look, if there's any slides that I think Shadim wanted to send, I can forward them out to those who registered. Yeah, no questions, current questions in the Q&A, but thank you so much for joining us, Shaqib. And Shadim, if you can hear us, thank you so much. You went above and beyond joining from the hospital chapel, I think.
Yeah.
Hear us. But thank you so much. And if we do have any, this will go on our website tomorrow, so it's recorded and it will be uploaded to our members resources area. And if there are any people who want to get in touch, is it okay if we forward them in your direction if they're looking for sort of signposting to the next stage?
So,
but really thought-provoking.
Yes, and you've got there, Joe, my email, both our email addresses, I believe. So if you want to, if you can sort of add that in the sort of blurb, then people can just send questions directly to us if they've got.
If you're happy, that would be perfect.
Yeah. We're happy to. Yeah, we're happy to sort of answer and get involved and support where we can. Yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone watching this. We will have it on the members area by tomorrow. So you can watch at your leisure, and I'll tag Shadim and Shaqib in so you can speak to the experts if you need any further help.